Christian had never thought of himself as a man prone to suspicion. He took pride in being level-headed, someone who trusted his family. But lately, there were things he couldn't ignore. Madeline and Isla had been acting differently. Madeline, who usually filled the house with laughter and chatter, had grown quiet around him. Isla, his teenage daughter who used to excitedly tell him about her day, now avoided his gaze, barely acknowledging him when he entered a room. One evening, Christian came home early from work, hoping to surprise them with takeout from their favorite restaurant. As he approached the door, he noticed a strange silence in the house. Normally, he would have heard the TV or Madeline in the kitchen, but this time, only muffled voices reached him. He paused in the hallway, drawn by the faint murmur of his wife and daughter's voices behind the closed door of Isla's room. Curiosity got the better of him. He crept closer, his heart pounding, feeling ridiculous for eavesdropping. But something in the tone of their voices kept him rooted in place. "Mom, I want everyone to know that Uncle Dave is my real dad. Not this loser." Isla's voice came through, clear and sharp. Christian's breath caught in his throat. For a moment he thought he'd misheard. "Uncle Dave? Real dad?" Then Madeline's voice replied, soft and conspiratorial. "I know, sweetheart, but wait until he gives me the house and the business. Then we can kick him out." Christian felt his knees go weak, clutching the wall to steady himself. A wave of shock washed over him, followed by a surge of anger, so intense he could barely breathe. His mind reeled. Madeline, his wife of 15 years, had betrayed him. And Isla, his own daughter, the child he'd raised and loved, had turned against him too. He stumbled back, careful not to make a sound, retreating to the living room where he collapsed into his favorite chair, stunned and horrified. The pieces began to fit together. The whispered conversations, the avoidance, the sudden shifts in behavior he'd tried to dismiss. Every doubt he'd pushed aside returned with brutal clarity. For hours, he sat there, replaying the scene in his mind, his anger growing darker with each thought. He felt humiliated, betrayed by the people he trusted most in the world. How long had this been going on? How many times had he missed the signs? As the house grew quiet for the night, Christian knew he had two options. He could confront Madeline and Isla immediately, demand answers, and let his anger loose. But as he thought about it, a sense of resolve settled over him. If he confronted them now, they'd lie, manipulate, twist the truth, and play innocent. They'd been planning this betrayal for a while. He needed a plan of his own, one that would expose them and leave no room for excuses. He would play along, act as if he didn't know a thing, but he would watch, and he would wait. The next day, Christian woke up before Madeline and Isla. He brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, steeling himself to face them. When Madeline finally came down, she smiled at him, giving him a quick peck on the cheek as if everything was normal. Christian had to force himself to smile back, keeping his expression relaxed, casual. "Morning," he said, careful to keep any bitterness from his voice. "Morning," she replied, reaching for a cup of coffee. "You're up early. Everything okay?" "Yeah, just couldn't sleep. Thought I'd start the day early." He watched her closely, looking for any hint of guilt or nervousness, but she seemed unbothered. It was almost sickening how easily she could act like nothing was wrong, like she wasn't planning to rip his life apart. Isla came down next, scrolling through her phone without a glance in his direction. She mumbled a half-hearted good morning, barely looking up. Christian studied her face, searching for the girl he'd raised, the daughter he'd loved. But all he saw was a stranger, someone who saw him as nothing more than an obstacle, a tool to be used and discarded. Over the next few days, Christian watched them carefully, noting every interaction, every shared glance between Madeline and Isla. He became hyper-aware of every whisper, every hushed conversation that ended the moment he entered the room. It was like a dark cloud had settled over his home. But he kept his composure, his anger simmering beneath the surface. One evening, while Madeline was out running errands, Christian decided to look through her things. He felt guilty, intrusive even, but he needed proof. He went to her study, searching through her desk drawers and files. In one folder, he found documents he hadn't seen before, a set of financial statements for his business, his properties, everything he'd worked for over the years. And then there was a draft of a will, with details that sent another surge of anger through him. She was planning to take everything. He closed the folder, his hands shaking. It wasn't just an affair. Madeline was planning to strip him of everything he owned. She wasn't just betraying him. She was preparing to destroy him. The sound of the garage door opening brought him back to his senses. Quickly, he put everything back in its place and left the study, making his way to the kitchen just as Madeline entered, shopping bags in hand. "Hey," she greeted him with a smile, oblivious to the fact that he'd just uncovered another piece of her plan. "I picked up some of your favorite snacks for movie night." "Thanks," he replied, feigning a smile. Inside, he felt a cold resolve forming. He'd known Madeline to be ambitious, but this was something else entirely. For the next few weeks, Christian lived in a strange, detached state, going through the motions while carefully setting up his plan. He arranged for a DNA test without Madeline's knowledge, hoping to confirm his suspicions about Isla. At work, he began preparing for an eventual handover of his responsibilities to his most trusted colleague, just in case things went south. He also contacted a lawyer, quietly drawing up divorce papers and securing his finances. Every night, he lay awake, wrestling with a mix of rage and heartbreak. He replayed their conversation over and over in his mind, feeling the pain fresh each time. But he reminded himself that the day of reckoning was coming. Soon, Madeline and Isla would face the consequences of their actions. Finally, after weeks of planning and preparation, he was ready. Christian woke up each day wearing a mask of calm, burying his anger beneath a forced smile. Every morning felt like a performance, a twisted game in which he pretended everything was normal while his heart ached with betrayal. He knew he couldn't confront them yet. This had to be done right, methodically, so there'd be no chance for Madeline and Isla to twist the truth. The plan came to him late one night in a flash of clarity. Isla's birthday was coming up, a day they'd normally celebrate with close family. This year, he decided he'd give her and her mother a day they'd never forget. It would be his chance to expose the lies, the manipulation, and reclaim his life on his terms. He began with the logistics. First, he contacted a lab for a DNA test on Isla. It felt strange and painful to have to confirm that the girl he'd raised as his daughter might not be his. But he needed proof. The results would be in by Isla's birthday, just in time for what he had planned. Then, he consulted a lawyer, drafting divorce papers that would leave Madeline without access to his assets or business. The day of Isla's birthday dawned cold and clear. Christian had been up since before sunrise, sitting alone in the quiet kitchen, sipping a cup of coffee and going over every detail of his plan. Today would be the day. Today, he'd finally be free of the lies, and he'd reclaim his life on his own terms. When Madeline and Isla came down, he greeted them with an easy smile that hid the storm raging within him. "Happy birthday, Isla," he said warmly, setting a wrapped gift on the table in front of her. She opened it to find a sleek, new tablet, something she'd been hinting at for months. Her face lit up with excitement as she turned it on, barely looking at him. "Thanks, Dad," she muttered, her attention already consumed by the device. Christian watched her, a twinge of sadness creeping in as he realized this might be the last time he'd hear her call him Dad. Shaking off the thought, he kept his expression calm. Today wasn't about regret or second thoughts. Today was about facing the truth. "So, I have one more surprise," he announced, turning to Madeline and Isla with a grin that felt strange on his face. "We're going on a family vacation. Just the three of us." Madeline's eyes widened. "Really? Where are we going?" Christian leaned back, maintaining his calm facade. "Well, I thought we could make a quick stop at my mom's first. You know how she loves seeing you too. And then we'll go somewhere special. Consider it a birthday surprise for all of us." Isla looked skeptical, but intrigued. "Are you serious? Like a luxury hotel or something?" "Something like that," Christian replied with a small smile. "But you'll just have to wait and see." The drive to his mother's house was quiet. Madeline and Isla chatted in the back, speculating on where he might be taking them, laughing at the possibilities. Christian kept his eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel tightly, forcing himself to stay focused on his plan. He knew what he had to do, but the anticipation gnawed at him, making each mile feel heavier than the last. When they pulled up to his mother's house, Madeline shot him a confused look. "We're staying here for the night?" "Just a quick family visit," Christian said lightly, stepping out of the car and gesturing for them to follow. "Come on, it'll be good to see Mom and Ben." Inside, his mother welcomed them with open arms, giving them each a warm hug. She glanced at Christian, and he could tell she sensed something was wrong. But, respecting his wishes, she kept quiet, simply offering Madeline and Isla a drink before inviting everyone into the living room. Once they'd settled in, Christian cleared his throat, standing in front of the room with his hands clasped together. The time had come. "Isla, Madeline," he began, keeping his tone steady. "I told you I had a special surprise planned, didn't I?" He paused, watching the anticipation and confusion flicker across their faces. Madeline gave a nervous laugh. "Well, you've certainly kept us in suspense, Christian. What's this big surprise?" Christian reached into his bag, pulling out a large envelope. This is the real surprise," he said, setting it down on the coffee table between them. He could see their expressions shift from confusion to worry as he opened the envelope and pulled out the DNA test results and the divorce papers. "What is this?" Madeline asked, her face paling as she glanced down at the documents. "Go ahead. Take a look," Christian said, his voice calm. "You've both had your secrets. Now it's time for mine." With trembling hands, Madeline picked up the DNA results, her face blanching as she read the confirmation that Christian was not Isla's biological father. Isla leaned over to look, her eyes widening in horror as she registered what it meant. "Christian," Madeline's voice was barely a whisper. I can explain," Christian cut her off, his gaze icy. "Explain what?" "Madeline? That you had an affair with my own brother? That you lied to me, plotted to take everything I've worked for, and turn my daughter against me?" He shook his head. "There's nothing left to explain." Isla looked at him, panic rising in her eyes. "Dad, please. I didn't mean it. I didn't know it was going to hurt you like this." "You didn't know?" Christian's voice was steady, yet filled with a quiet anger. "You called me a loser, Isla. You and your mother both thought I was too blind to see what was right in front of me. You thought you could just discard me and replace me with Uncle Dave. Ask your gold digger mom and your real dad all your stupid questions. I'm out of this shit." Madeline reached for his hand, but he pulled away, stepping back. "Christian, please. It was a mistake. I never wanted it to go this far. I love you." "Love," he scoffed, crossing his arms. "You don't know the meaning of the word, Madeline. Love doesn't betray, doesn't deceive, doesn't try to tear someone's life apart for the sake of convenience." Madeline's eyes filled with tears as she tried to speak, her words catching in her throat. I was confused. It was a moment of weakness. A moment?" Christian laughed bitterly. "This has been going on for years, Madeline. This isn't some one-time mistake. You and Dave planned this, using my own daughter to hurt me." Isla broke down, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, please. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know what it would mean." Christian looked at her, his heart heavy. "You knew, Isla. You knew, and you still chose to go along with it. You wanted me out of the picture. Well, you've got your wish." Madeline's voice grew frantic, desperate. "Please, Christian, let's talk about this. We can fix it. We can go to therapy, anything. Just don't leave us like this." But Christian shook his head, the resolve in his eyes unbreakable. "I already did, Madeline. The moment I heard the two of you talking about your plans, about how you'd kick me out after I gave you everything, I was done." He handed her the divorce papers. "I want you to sign these, and I want both of you out of my life. You can ask Uncle Dave for support from now on." Madeline crumpled, sinking to her knees, clutching the papers as if they were a lifeline. "Christian, please. I'll do anything. I'll change, I swear." But Christian was unmoved. "The time for change has passed. You both made your choice. Now I'm making mine." He turned to leave, pausing at the doorway to look back at them one last time. The image of Madeline sobbing, Isla clutching her mother's arm, would stay with him. But he knew it was the only way to reclaim his life. There would be no more deception, no more betrayal. Without another word, he walked out, leaving them behind. The weight of the betrayal remained, but with each step, he felt lighter, freer, ready to build a life on his own terms. The silence from Christian was unrelenting. Madeline and Isla found themselves trapped in the aftermath of their own actions, grappling with the cold reality that Christian was gone. The man they had taken for granted had finally turned his back on them, and they were left with nothing but echoes of the life they had destroyed. At first, Madeline thought it was just a phase, that Christian would come around and reconsider. She left voicemail after voicemail, her tone growing more desperate with each one. "Christian, please just let me explain. I made a mistake. I was selfish, I know that now. Just give me a chance to make things right. We were a family." Her voice cracked, but there was no response. Days turned to weeks, and Christian's silence only grew louder. The cold reality began to sink in, and Madeline's confidence faltered. She hadn't thought it through. She'd assumed Christian would always be there, that he'd forgive her, just like he had forgiven her countless small betrayals in the past. But this time was different. This time he was done. Isla was equally devastated. She was old enough to understand the impact of her words and actions. And now, sitting alone in the bedroom that had once been hers and Christian's, the weight of guilt was almost too much to bear. She replayed their conversation in her head, the careless, hurtful words she'd thrown around without thinking of the consequences. She had wanted to hurt Christian, but she hadn't expected him to walk away completely. "Mom, do you think he'll ever forgive us?" Isla asked one night, her voice small and broken. Madeline looked at her daughter, seeing her own guilt reflected in Isla's eyes. She wrapped her arms around her, trying to console her, even though she herself had no real answer. "I don't know, honey," she whispered, stroking Isla's hair. I thought he'd at least want to talk, but he shut us out completely." When Dave, the man they had relied on, learned that Christian had found out the truth, he distanced himself from them quickly. Dave stopped answering Madeline's calls, and on the rare occasion she managed to catch him, he was short, almost irritated. "Look, Madeline, I have my own life to take care of," Dave said bluntly during their last call. "You and Isla can't just expect me to pick up the pieces." "That wasn't the deal." "The deal?" Madeline replied, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Dave, we have nothing now. Christian left us with nothing." "I thought you..." "Thought what?" Dave snapped, cutting her off. "That I was going to swoop in and take care of everything? I never signed up to be anyone's knight in shining armor, Madeline. Maybe you should have thought of that before." He hung up, leaving Madeline in stunned silence. She convinced herself that Dave would be her safety net, her backup plan if things with Christian ever fell apart. But now she saw the truth. Dave had only ever been interested in the thrill of the affair, not in a future together. Now he wanted nothing to do with her or Isla. Reality hit hard. Madeline realized how deep in denial she had been, clinging to the belief that she could have it all. Christian's security, Dave's excitement. She and Isla were left with little money, few friends, and no one to turn to. Their former life had slipped away, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Desperation led Madeline to make one final attempt at contacting Christian. She sat on the edge of her bed, her phone trembling in her hands, rehearsing what she would say. She called him, knowing it was unlikely he'd answer, and was met with his voicemail once again. "Christian, please, just listen to me." Her voice wavered as she fought back tears. "I know I hurt you. I know I broke our family, and I don't deserve forgiveness. But I can't live with the thought of you hating me. Please, if there's any part of you that remembers the good times, if you ever loved me, just give me a chance to make it right. For Isla's sake, if nothing else." She ended the call, staring at the phone, hoping for a reply. But none came. Meanwhile, Christian was rebuilding his life, moving forward without looking back. He'd thrown himself into his work, focused on growing his business, and found solace in the company of friends who supported him through the ordeal. The betrayal had hurt deeply, but each day he grew a little stronger, a little more determined to live life on his own terms. There were moments when he thought about reaching out, maybe just to hear Isla's voice, to see if there was any sincerity in her remorse. But he reminded himself that this new life was one he'd earned, free from lies and manipulation. They'd made their choice. Now he was making his. Weeks later, Christian received a letter in the mail, written in Madeline's handwriting. He considered throwing it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of him. He opened it, scanning her words. In the letter, Madeline poured out her remorse, expressing regret for everything she'd done. She acknowledged her faults, admitting she'd let greed and selfishness destroy their marriage. She apologized for using Isla against him and asked for forgiveness, not for herself, but for Isla's sake. "She's young," Madeline wrote. "She made mistakes, but she's hurting too. She misses you." Christian read the letter twice, feeling a pang of sadness for the life they'd once shared. But he knew that forgiving them would mean reopening old wounds, sacrificing his peace for a past that was beyond saving. He folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope, leaving it in his desk drawer, unanswered. Isla's remorse grew as she witnessed her mother's despair, realizing that their actions had shattered not just her relationship with Christian, but the foundation of her family. One day, she tried calling Christian herself, hoping he'd answer, that she could tell him how sorry she was, how much she missed him. But her call went to voicemail, just like all the others. "Dad, it's me, Isla," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know I hurt you. I was stupid and angry, and I didn't mean what I said. You were always there for me, even when I didn't deserve it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. I love you, Dad." But her words, like her mother's, went unheard. Christian was moving forward, carving a new path, one where he could finally be free from the betrayal that had nearly broken him. For Madeline and Isla, life was a harsh adjustment. Without Christian's support, they had to make do with far less, moving into a modest apartment, where they lived a far cry from the comfort and security they'd once enjoyed. Each day was a reminder of the life they had lost, the trust they had squandered. Madeline looked out the window one evening, the empty quiet of their apartment pressing in on her. She could see Isla sitting on the couch, silent, lost in her own thoughts. She wanted to reach out, to comfort her daughter, but even now, there was a distance between them. The bond they had once shared felt fragile, damaged by the very lies they had used to hurt Christian. "Isla," she whispered, her voice carrying a sadness she couldn't fully express. "We did this to ourselves, didn't we?" Isla nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. I wish he'd forgive us." But forgiveness, they realized, was something they might never receive. They had made their choices, and Christian had moved on, leaving them to live with the consequences of the life they had so carelessly thrown away. Christian had spent months rebuilding himself from the ground up, focusing on his business with a relentless energy. It had grown faster than he'd ever anticipated, each successful milestone serving as proof that he was no longer defined by the betrayal he'd endured. He had reclaimed his life, and with it his sense of purpose. But he hadn't anticipated meeting someone new so soon, let alone someone like Anna. He met Anna at a business seminar, one he'd almost skipped in his drive to focus solely on his own work. She had been seated a few rows away, asking thoughtful questions, her focus and quiet confidence catching his attention. During a break, she approached him. "Hi, I'm Anna." She introduced herself, extending a hand. "I think we were on the same panel a few months ago. Your name sounded familiar." Christian shook her hand, smiling. "Christian, good to meet you, Anna. You have a pretty impressive approach to business." She laughed, shaking her head. "Thanks, but I'm sure I could learn a lot from you. Your company's growth has been pretty remarkable, to say the least." That conversation turned into coffee, and then coffee into dinner. And soon Christian found himself enjoying her company more than he had with anyone in years. Anna was straightforward, honest in a way that felt refreshing. She asked questions that were genuinely curious, not judgmental, and she listened. One evening, they were sitting on a quiet patio after a long dinner, watching the city lights. "So," Anna said, breaking a comfortable silence, "why the sudden surge in business? I heard you started expanding aggressively only recently." Christian paused, caught between his instinct to keep his past hidden and his growing trust in her. After a moment, he decided to be honest. "It's complicated," he admitted. "My life took a turn a while back. A betrayal. Actually, I threw myself into work to rebuild, to prove to myself that I was more than what I'd been through. Anna's gaze was steady, empathetic. That must have been painful, she said softly. But I think what you did, turning that pain into purpose, is something not everyone can do. Christian exhaled, feeling a weight lift. It wasn't easy. Some days, I wasn't even sure what I was doing. But meeting someone like you, it's reminded me that there's still good in the world. They sat in silence again, the sounds of the city a gentle backdrop to their thoughts. Anna reached across the table, her hand resting over his. I can't imagine the pain you went through, Christian, she said, her voice full of sincerity. But you deserve happiness. You deserve a new beginning. He looked at her, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, a genuine sense of hope. For the first time in a long time, I actually feel like that's possible. Their relationship blossomed slowly, naturally, without the weight of hidden agendas or unspoken resentments. They took the time to know each other, to understand the dreams and fears that shaped them. Anna was different. She was genuine, kind, and fiercely independent. She had her own life and ambitions and supported him without any expectations. For Christian, it was a revelation. One day, as they walked through a local park, Anna broached a subject he'd long avoided. "Do you ever think about your daughter?" she asked gently, knowing it was a tender spot. Christian sighed, looking at the ground. "Sometimes," he admitted, "I wonder if she's doing okay. But I know it's best to keep my distance. That part of my life, it's closed off now. She made her choice, and I've made mine." Anna nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "You know, people change. I'm not saying you should forgive her, but maybe it would bring you some peace to let go of whatever resentment is left." Christian gave a half smile, appreciating her perspective. "I think I'm getting there bit by bit. I won't deny there's still some hurt. But with you, it's easier to let it go." Anna squeezed his hand, understanding that healing was a journey. She knew better than to push him, offering her support whenever he needed it. Their bond deepened, and Christian found himself letting go of the last remnants of his past bitterness. He saw his time with Anna as a gift, an opportunity to build a new life that wasn't tainted by the betrayal that had nearly destroyed him. Months later, Christian was in his office going through some documents when he received an unexpected message from Madeline. He hadn't heard from her in months, and he hesitated before opening it. The message was short, apologetic, and hinted at the struggles she and Isla had been facing. She didn't ask for anything, just expressed a wish that he was happy and thanked him for the years they'd shared. It was the first message that didn't come with pleading or excuses. Christian read it through, a strange calm settling over him. He felt no anger, no need for revenge. Instead, he felt closure. He typed out a brief, polite reply, wishing her well and expressing his hope that they, too, would find peace. When he told Anna about the message, she listened, a supportive presence beside him. "Do you feel better?" she asked. He nodded. "I do. I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying until now. I'm ready to move forward fully with you." Anna smiled, her eyes warm. "I think this is a beautiful new beginning for both of us." They stood in his office, holding each other, a quiet understanding passing between them. Christian knew he had finally let go of the pain that had haunted him, and he was ready to embrace a future where trust and happiness weren't just possibilities, they were his new reality. Madeline and Isla's lives had unraveled faster than they could have ever imagined. The world that once seemed full of promise now felt small and confined, filled only with the weight of their own choices. Each day seemed harder than the last, and as their financial situation worsened, they realized how fragile their new life truly was. When Dave learned that Christian had cut them off completely, he was quick to distance himself. At first, Madeline didn't believe he would abandon her. After all, he had been so attentive, always promising a future together. But when the bills started piling up and her calls to him went unanswered, the truth was painfully clear. Dave had never intended to be her savior. He'd simply enjoyed the thrill of the affair without any intention of being part of her life permanently. Madeline found herself pacing the small apartment they had been forced to rent, her mind racing with worry and anger. She felt trapped, as if the walls were closing in on her. Her resentment toward Dave grew with each passing day, as did her regret. She saw now how foolish she'd been to risk everything for a man who couldn't care less about her. Isla was also struggling. The friends she once had seemed to drift away, uncomfortable with the rumors surrounding her family. Her confidence, once unshakable, had been shattered. She missed the stability that Christian had provided and was haunted by the last words he had said to them. She would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the hurtful things she had said, wondering how she could ever have been so cruel. One evening, as Madeline sat in the dimly lit kitchen, going through the few remaining bills they could pay, Isla finally broke down. "Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "do you think he'll ever forgive us? I mean, we hurt him so badly. I don't even recognize myself when I think about what I said to him." Madeline looked up, seeing the raw vulnerability in her daughter's face. Isla was no longer the smug teenager she had been months ago. The harsh realities of their situation had stripped her of that arrogance. "I don't know, Isla," Madeline admitted quietly. "I hoped he would, at first. But we did something unforgivable. We took him for granted. And now we're paying for it." Isla's eyes filled with tears, and she clutched the edge of the table, looking desperate. "I don't even care about the money anymore, or the house, or any of it. I just want him back. I want to tell him I'm sorry, even if he doesn't believe me." Madeline reached across the table, placing a hand on her daughter's. "I know, sweetheart. I feel the same way. But Christian, he's done with us. I can see that now." Desperation drove Madeline to make one final attempt at reaching out to Christian. She sent him an email, pouring her heart into every word, hoping that somehow he would hear the sincerity in her apology. She wrote about the regret that kept her awake at night, the shame she felt every time she looked at Isla, knowing she had set a terrible example as a mother. She didn't ask for anything, not even forgiveness, just the chance to speak with him, to apologize in person. When Christian received the email, he read it with a steady calm. He felt no desire to respond, no impulse to grant her the peace she was seeking. He'd moved on, found a new life with Anna, and letting Madeline back in, even just for a conversation, felt like reopening a door he had firmly closed. He deleted the email without a second thought, feeling only a brief, cold satisfaction in knowing they were experiencing the consequences of their betrayal. As days turned into weeks, Madeline and Isla's desperation only deepened. Madeline considered reaching out to mutual friends, but the rumors had spread too far. No one wanted to be involved in the drama that had enveloped her life. Their finances grew tighter, and eventually they were forced to move into an even smaller apartment, far from the neighborhood they once called home. One afternoon, as they walked back to their apartment with grocery bags, a familiar figure crossed their path. It was Dave, looking smug and content, walking arm in arm with another woman. Madeline felt a surge of anger and humiliation as she watched him laugh with his new partner, oblivious to her presence. Isla caught her mother's expression and followed her gaze, her face turning pale as she saw the man they had once relied on so deeply. "Mom, don't just leave it," Isla whispered, sensing the fury bubbling up in her mother. But Madeline couldn't help herself. She approached Dave, her voice trembling with pent-up rage. "So this is it," she spat, unable to contain herself. "You just walk away and pretend we never mattered? After everything?" Dave barely flinched, looking at her with a mix of annoyance and indifference. "Madeline, you made your bed. Don't act like you're the victim here. You knew exactly what you were getting into." Madeline clenched her fists, struggling to hold back tears. "You promised me. You promised us that you'd be there if things fell apart." Dave smirked. "I never promised you anything serious, Madeline. You just heard what you wanted to hear. Maybe next time, don't throw away a good man for a fling." With that, he walked away, leaving Madeline standing in the middle of the sidewalk, feeling more humiliated than she ever had before. Isla reached for her mother's arm, pulling her away from the scene, her own face etched with shame. "Let's just go home, Mom," she whispered, her voice choked. "He's not worth it." As they walked back, Madeline finally broke down, her shoulders shaking as she cried. Isla held her, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow, realizing that they truly had no one left. The life they had envisioned with Dave had crumbled, leaving them with nothing but each other. In the following weeks, Madeline made one last attempt to reach Christian, leaving him a voicemail late one night. "Christian," she said, her voice hollow and weary, "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I took advantage of your kindness, and I was wrong. I understand if you never want to see me or Isla again. But please, if you can find it in your heart, just talk to us. I miss you. Isla misses you. We just want to apologize, even if that's all we'll ever be able to do." But the voicemail went unanswered, and in time, Madeline realized it was over for good. Meanwhile, Christian was thriving. He'd found joy again, a sense of purpose that extended beyond his work. His relationship with Anna had deepened into something meaningful, built on trust and mutual respect. For the first time in years, he felt free from the weight of past mistakes, from the need for revenge, from the lingering pain of betrayal. One evening, as he sat with Anna on a beach, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he thought back to Madeline and Isla, realizing he no longer harbored any anger or bitterness. He had left that life behind, and with Anna by his side, he was ready for a new chapter, one filled with peace and love. He turned to Anna, taking her hand in his. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything, for helping me see that life could be good again." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "You did that on your own, Christian. I just reminded you of what you already had inside." As they sat together, the past felt like a distant memory, a chapter he had finally closed. And as for Madeline and Isla, they were left to live with the choices they'd made, haunted by the man they had lost, realizing too late the value of the life they had thrown away. Months had passed since Christian had cut Madeline and Isla out of his life, and he had never felt more at peace. He had built a stable, genuine relationship with Anna, one free from hidden motives and betrayal. Their bond had grown into something he once thought impossible, and each day with her felt like a chance to rediscover the joy he thought he'd lost forever. One morning, as they sat on the patio of Anna's small beach house, sipping coffee and watching the waves, Christian found himself reflecting on how much had changed. "It's strange," he mused, his gaze lost in the horizon. "I spent so long focusing on what I lost, but now it feels like I gained so much more in return." Anna set her coffee down, studying him thoughtfully. "You're different now, Christian. You've let go of something heavy. I don't know what it was exactly, but I can feel it when you're around me." He looked at her, taking in the warmth of her expression. "You know, I didn't believe it was possible to trust again. Not after everything, but you've shown me that I can." Anna smiled, her hand finding his across the table. "Sometimes we have to go through the darkest moments to find the light again." As Christian held her hand, he felt a surge of gratitude. He knew that he was truly free of the past, not just in words, but in a way that allowed him to look forward to the future without any lingering bitterness. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Madeline and Isla's lives had taken a stark turn. They had moved into a small, cramped apartment provided by a distant relative who took them in out of pity rather than affection. Their days were a stark contrast to the life of comfort they had once enjoyed. The illusion of wealth and privilege was gone, replaced by a life of frugality and regret. One night, Madeline sat in the dimly lit kitchen, sorting through the small pile of groceries they'd managed to buy for the week. Isla was at the table, her head down, her silence filled with resentment and shame. The vibrant, confident young woman she once was had been replaced by someone who barely spoke, who rarely met her mother's eyes. As Madeline placed a can of soup on the shelf, she broke the silence. "Isla, I know this is hard. I know it's my fault that we're here. But we'll get through this. Somehow." Isla didn't look up. "I don't want to hear that," she said quietly. "It's not somehow. We're here because of choices. Your choices. Mine too, I guess. But don't act like this just happened to us." Madeline flinched, the sting of Isla's words echoing in the silence. She had never expected this from her daughter, the same daughter who had once been her closest ally. Now, it was clear that Isla held her responsible for everything. "Isla, I know I made mistakes," Madeline said, her voice faltering. "But we have to stick together. We're all we have left." Isla shook her head, bitterness lining her features. I never thought we'd end up like this. I never thought he'd just disappear from our lives completely. Madeline felt a pang of regret. She had underestimated Christian, thinking he would never actually leave, that he'd always be there as a safety net. Now, that safety net was gone, and they were left facing the harsh reality. Back in his own world, Christian continued building his new life with Anna. They took weekend trips, explored new cities, and shared late-night conversations that went deeper than anything he'd experienced before. Each moment reinforced his decision to walk away from the pain of the past. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Anna glanced at him with a thoughtful smile. "Have you thought about reaching out to Isla?" she asked gently. "I know she hurt you, but she's young. Maybe there's a chance she's changed." Christian considered her words, letting the question settle. "I've thought about it," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if she regrets what happened. But I don't think she's ready for that conversation. And I don't know if I'm ready either." Anna nodded, her gaze soft with understanding. "When you are, I'll be here to support you." Christian leaned back, letting out a breath. For the first time, he felt at peace with the idea of leaving the door open, just a crack for Isla. He knew forgiveness would take time, and he was willing to let it come naturally. He had moved on, but if she ever wanted to mend things, he wanted to be able to meet her halfway. Madeline and Isla's lives continued to spiral downward. The few friends they once had drifted away, and any social invitations had long since dried up. Without Christian's support or the backing of Dave, who had disappeared entirely from their lives, every day felt like a new struggle. One afternoon, Madeline was sitting in a small, dingy cafe, sipping a coffee she could barely afford, when she overheard two women at the next table discussing a recent business success story. Her heart skipped as she recognized the name. "Did you hear about Christian? His company just opened a new office. They're expanding like crazy. And his new partner, Anna, is apparently a big part of it." Madeline felt a wave of bitterness and regret wash over her. She realized that while she and Isla were barely scraping by, Christian was thriving. The life she had gambled and lost was now his to enjoy, with someone else by his side. The irony stung, leaving her to wonder how differently things could have turned out if she hadn't made the choices she had. As she sat there, listening to the women talk about Christian's success, Madeline felt an overwhelming sense of loss. She had lost him forever, and she had no one to blame but herself. Years passed, and Christian's relationship with Anna continued to deepen. One evening, as they celebrated the success of a new business project, Anna took his hand. "I'm proud of you, Christian. You've been through so much, but you came out of it stronger," she said, looking at him with admiration. Christian smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've shown me that there's life beyond the hurt, that I can build something new." She kissed him gently, a promise of the life they were building together. "You have a future, Christian, and it's going to be amazing." For Christian, the journey had come full circle. He had found love and stability again, free from the shadows of betrayal. As he looked forward, he felt a profound sense of closure. The ghosts of his past had faded, replaced by a bright future with someone who truly valued him. In the end, Madeline and Isla were left with the consequences of their choices, trapped in the life they had created for themselves. Christian, however, had risen above it, embracing a new beginning filled with love, trust, and the promise of true happiness. He knew now that sometimes the darkest times led to the brightest new chapters, and he was ready to write his next one.